Yes, this is the Grassy Knoll. This is the Grassy Knoll on AM 1610 WDCX. We have with us for round 3 Andy Colvin, who is the documentary filmmaker of the Mothman's photographer. And he's joining us from the great state of Washington up in the Northwest. Andrew, thank you for coming back to visit with us on the Grassy Knoll.
Thank you, my pleasure.
You got to say that, don't you? I know, yeah, it's protocol. But,
the volume's a little low, but...
Can you hear me better now? All right. We left off at a very, very interesting juncture at the end of the second hour. And you got into some of the Nazi connections, and if you can recall, what does this all tie into, not only with the Mothman, but the things that do take place, strangely, in West Virginia and the environs about?
Well, I think the thing we were on there with regard to Mothman, first of all, was the things that some of the contactees were being shown by, quote, the aliens or the spacemen. I mean, it's kind of interesting that these spacemen were not gray aliens like all the other ones we hear about. These were normal-looking folks, which tends to make me believe that they were probably real guys. But these contactees were being shown, I think I mentioned the visions of Iraq that Woody Derenberger had been shown.
Right.
And that they probably had, those were probably reconnaissance films that were being shown to him, which indicates that there might be an oil company linked to whoever was doing it.
But let's go back to that, because we did end on it, and that's the name that I was trying to think of. It's Woody...
Woody Derenberger. He's the big name, I guess, as far as contactees and witnesses in the story.
Okay.
And he wrote a book called Visitors from Lanulos, which is his story of these contacts. And a lot of people came to his farm to see UFOs, and Keel mentions that there were some lights in the sky, but nothing really concrete, so it could have been a light show of some kind. Derenberger was also told things about the pool Ultima, which is a Nazi idea. Their land, sort of their heaven on earth land of Thule, which is supposedly up near Iceland, and they have all of these legends about it, and it entered into the Nazi mindset pretty strongly. And there was a Thule society that you mentioned after we got off the air, and that, of course, was linked to that. So you have these contactees being, told Blavatsky-like Nazi things, and that sort of goes back to the distinct possibility that these Nazi scientists who were brought over, who had already done mind control in Germany, were brought over, a lot of them to Ohio State, Wright-Patterson, which is very close to Point Pleasant. And these guys, probably were just following some lines, programming that they already had used before.
Let me stop you there. The individual's name is Derenberger?
Correct.
Okay. And he was apparently an abductee?
Yes.
Okay.
And, he was a willing participant. We didn't really have the abductee thing yet.
How does he make himself a willing participant?
Well, that's an interesting question.
I mean, do you go out in the field and say, here I am?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that he had a military background, and his son at the time was in the military, and he got on the lecture circuit, which is kind of interesting. It's not easy to get on the lecture circuit for just the average Joe. And I've sort of noticed that a lot of the prominent UFO lecture people seem to have these military or intelligence backgrounds. That's one strange thing about it. And his whole case was monitored by the Air Force. There was an Air Force guy investigating him, and they set up a lie detector test and psychiatric test for him by a guy named Jensen, who shows up. His name has shown up in some other places that are kind of interesting. Possible mind control connection there.
Let's see.
The Derenberger psychiatrist was Alan Roberts, who's the same psychiatrist who was treating my friend in Charleston.
Is that a good or a bad thing?
Well, it's unusual because the psychiatrist himself is going along with the story that Indrid Cold was indeed from another planet. Indrid Cold was the spaceman that was telling Derenberger these things.
This doesn't really matter, I mean, as far as your credibility. I go back and forth with a whole lot of people, Christians and non-Christians, that would discuss this idea of extraterrestrials. I don't really have a problem with it. I really don't know where it fits or what we should think about it, but I don't think there's any problem that there's been some interterrestrial travel throughout time, and it wouldn't shake me up. On the other hand, Andrew, also, I mean, UFOs, I mean, we probably have them, and whatever's out there might belong to someone else, and the point is, what is the point? But what I did want to go and ask you about, because it's really interesting, and that is taking you back to where you said there might have been some infiltration through Operation Paperclip, not only into Area 51, but you, I'm going to say you think, and that would be a slight to you. I mean, do you have documentation? Do you know? And I have my own ideas, but do you know that they also came into the Upper Ohio Valley and the Northeast?
Do I know who came in?
That Nazis that were spirited out of Germany after World War II.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's hard fact.
I agree.
Several books on that people can look into. George Lazenby has a book. Linda Hunt has a fairly recent book. It's kind of hard to find. And in fact, there were lots of negotiations that went on for what to do with these guys. And that's where the paperclip came in, is that they just decided, well, we'll put a paperclip on the guys that we want in, put a paperclip on their file, and we'll just make it happen without telling anybody, because it was obvious that people didn't want these guys, in. And the generals decided, and actually there's a Union Carbide official who was part of this process, and I like to focus on Carbide because they were so prevalent in the valley that I lived in. And there's, so many different angles, things that they were into, including activities out near Area 51. Union Carbide has facilities all over the country. They were in charge of the uranium mining. They had a full-scale Martian landscape set up in the early 60s for testing, quote, supposedly testing materials, and that could have been in Area 51. There were people overheard some of the JFK conspirators talking about Area 51. So there were lots of shenanigans going on there.
And also, and you mentioned this as well, and it's not that far away from Point Pleasant, and that is that very curious place called Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Yeah, there's, this theories swirl about it as, that they have the crashed saucer from Roswell. I sort of think that whole story is, I don't put much faith in that whole story. It's sort of I just think it's a way to occupy people's imaginations, instead, so that they don't look at the other things that Wright-Patterson did that are very easy to verify, like bringing in all these Nazis.
Let me clarify. Do you think that Roswell was a Cook story as a distractor?
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
And there were lots of things in 47 like that. The Maury Island incident with Fred Krisman. Did I talk about Krisman?
No, not that I know. No. You want to broach it now?
Okay. Briefly, the Maury Island UFO incident was the first incident of all, right? It was before the Kenneth Arnold sightings. And this flag fell from a UFO. A guy on a boat was hit. He turns out to work for Fred Krisman, and Fred Krisman was a CIA disruption agent who later was reputedly supposed to have been at the JFK assassination. There's lots of Krisman stayed here in the Seattle area most of the time, and he was mostly involved with, well, the things that we know of. He was involved with disrupting progressives in the Seattle area. He worked for Boeing for a while. He would go in and they would, they usually had a target that they were trying to disrupt, some sort of movement or group, and he would go in and he was just really good at turning everyone against each other. And he did that at Boeing. He did that at the school district. So it sort of goes to show the level of was probably part of Operation Chaos, which I mentioned before, disrupting the peace and labor movements at that time in the mid-60s. That's when it started. And they, would get down to the level of messing with people that were, working in the school district. But Chrisman also was a pilot, and he was caught stealing gold from Swiss Air at one point. There's a newspaper article about that that surfaced. And so there's kind of the gold thing comes up time and time again. Did I mention Peter D. Beater? I think I did.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
The gold thing there. And of course, the Nazis had an interest in gold. The Nazis had an interest in the Thule and the White Brotherhood of Tibet. This supposed idea that there are 7 or 9 great beings that inhabit some ethereal region and watch over things.
Well, that's what piqued my interest. And let me ask you this: did you get that PDF I sent you of Van Helsing's book?
Yes.
Okay. Now, he's out there. Well, it's the old story. It's about there are people who have their own agenda when they write books. The thing that we hope for, no matter what, is that whatever factual, documented, and referenced information they have is correct, and is at least that is gleaned of any kind of subjectivity. When you mentioned that at the end of the second hour, and this is something we can't spin off on because that goes down all kinds of roads of conjecture and it takes all kinds of time. But there was this concern or this interest or this obsession by the Nazis, especially Hitler, with this whole Aryan idea that goes back, even into what we, I guess, can say is some race out of Antarctica. Can you address that at all?
I don't know anything about Antarctica, really. I just heard of things. But the White Brotherhood idea came into my story again when we were filming, and I could talk about that.
All right, let's do that. And the other thing I would say, just to pick up on this, the other half is the Thule, idea, and that was, yes, as you stated correctly, a very imaginary place. And I kidded around with you off mic when we talked and said and to this day it may also be going out there, and that's that cartoon strip, Prince Valiant, always, which was Nordic in its origins, always talked about Thule as being a real place, and in fact he was, I guess, nobility in Thule. But there is that idea, before northern land that is completely white, a superior race, etc. And I'm not going to go into it any further, nor should I, but this is an extension of what supposedly is happening, or some would say not happening, in Antarctica all these many years. And it was interesting, Andrew, that Orwell, and I didn't send you that paragraph that I promised I would, and I will after this show, made a very, very curious allusion to the lost islands of Antarctica. But that has seemed to be some kind of place we don't know what's going on. I'm not subscribing to a hollow earth theory where, all the good people live on the inside and we, basically scums live on the outside. But there is something shaking there, and it goes through this continuum into what Hitler had embraced. So, and the Thule Society, I would also say, I don't know if you have anything to back this up, its extension also is Skull and Bones on this side of the ocean.
Well, I recently picked up the ultimate book on the Skull and Bones, but haven't gotten through it yet.
Okay.
Just started it, but it's called Fleshing Out Skull and Bones.
By Milligan. Yeah, Chris Milligan. Yeah, did a great job. And also, if you don't have it, I'll send it to you. I'm not supposed to say that because it's copyrighted. But Anthony C. Sutton also wrote America's Secret Establishment, focusing definitely on Skull and Bones.
Yeah, it's been years since I read that one.
Okay.
But
right.
there's so much stuff out there. And I'm usually reading about 10 books at once. So
I know the feeling.
And so it's all there somewhere, and I just try to focus on the overall picture, trying to keep draw a map of it all.
Are you working on a book right now?
I am.
Okay.
Well, go ahead.
Would you give us a little insight as to what would be the focus of that book?
Well, it's about the Mothman, and it's about all of these different tentacles, and
about which we are speaking these 3 hours.
Yes.
And beyond.
There's going to be. There's not going to be. There's about 30, 40 pages of text in it, so it's not going to be overwhelming for people that have trouble following, all of these different threads. But everything will be mentioned that's meaningful to me, at least right now. And there are lots of photographs in there. There's about 250 photos. It's sort of a poetic approach to conspiracy. I don't think it's been done yet, so I'm excited. It's a new style. But it's a great way to do it, and it's an outgrowth of the way that I've worked all along, which is to take photos as ways for helping me understand more of what's going on subconsciously. A lot of strange things happened when I was young, and a lot of those things have leaked out in my artwork unconsciously. And so some of the things in the book are going to be from 20, 25 years ago that have an amazing, synchronicity to the things we're talking about. And so I think it's going to be a great book, and I'm really looking forward to everything about it.
Are you going to take control of the publishing of that book?
Take control of it?
Yeah.
I mean,
in other words, okay, let me be frank. If you're going to tell the truth, the mega publishing houses are not going to give you a light of day. So either you self-publish or you go to a reputable, I guess what you would call small publishing house that still is into publishing material, whether or not it's given an imprimatur by the powers that be.
Oh, okay, yeah. And Milligan is a good example of that. He just started his own press.
Excellent.
That's right. Day.
That's right.
And then, of course, you get hit with lawsuits as soon as you start publishing the truth. Just as a way to sort of keep you from going anywhere. But in this case, we're partnering with a friend that I went to art school with in Cincinnati, Dave Scott, who has started a new gallery called the Cincinnati Conceptual Art Gallery. And right now it's online. It's like it's one of the first online art galleries.
What's the URL for that, if you don't mind giving it to us?
I'm sorry?
Can you give us the URL for that at this time?
I don't have it.
Okay. All right. And in time, at least they can hit it if they go through your site. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That you linked it. Okay. And your site is andycolvin.com. And that's also where they can access your documentary. Is that correct?
That's right. The book's going to be on there too in a month or two. It's called The Eye of the Garuda, and there's a long subtitle that I can read if you want.
Well, go ahead.
we sort of gotten into this having these long subtitles. We did a soundtrack to the book and movie first. So that was a few years ago when we first decided to sort of come out with it. When I decided to tell my story publicly, first thing I did was music. CD is called Power Dump. Songs for abductees, PR goofs, corporate hacks, media wanks, and other assorted mind control victims.
These are actually...
Parenthesis, this includes all of us, my friend.
So
and that's by Ivy League, which is a band that I was in for a few years. Before, it was an offshoot of another band that has a notorious past. Ed Hall out of Austin. It's a band that I started in the mid-'80s with 3 guys from Houston who were sons of oil men. And I'm actually working on a documentary about that whole experience, and the book as well about that. So I won't go into that here, but
sure.
There's so many things that I've done in my life seem to connect to parts of the story, and this Houston oil connection is one of them.
Well, Sons of Oilmen, that's a provocative title right there if you wanted to use it.
Yeah, and some of the things I learned there were we weren't in Houston, we were in Austin, but you meet a lot of people from Texas and you hear a lot of things, and one of the things I remember hearing from a woman who's her I think at the time her mom was married to a big chicken guy who was a chicken processing fellow who was close to the Clintons, and she was saying that Clinton and Bush were a lot closer than people realized. This is back in the 80s. And of course back then everyone thought, well, or maybe the early 90s, I guess, when I talked to her about this. And of course everyone thought that they were polar opposites. And she was saying, no, they're not. And of course now we see Clinton and Bush together doing these tours.
Yeah.
Things.
Oh yeah. This is a big...
the word on Clinton was, and it didn't really hit me until today, was that he supposedly is a member of the Rockefeller family.
Well, you know, you had a Rockefeller down there too. What was it, Winnie?
Well, he's supposed to be the illegitimate grandchild of Winnie, I think. Is Winnie older?
Oh yeah, Winnie. Yeah, Winnie is one of the older ones, and was a former governor of Arkansas. And I tell you what, it's almost like that book about Kevin Bacon. You know, in this country, all roads lead back to the Rockefellers. You know? So this doesn't surprise me in the least. I mean, Arkansas is a funky state also, where a lot of stuff went down. You know, and that's where Sammy Walton started off also with the China Mart chain that we know today.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, with Rockefeller, I'll say this, you don't have to. With the Rockefellers seem to set up camp, some interesting things happen. So with Winnie in Arkansas and Jay in West Virginia, Nelson in New York, it's a love boat.
Well, I had a roommate who was a manager at Walmart in the mid '80s. This was when they were small, or not small, but they had only gone as far as the South, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Regionally, hadn't gotten everywhere else. And
what
he went on to work for Continental Bank, which has a lot of intelligence connections, and I think had some connection to the SNL scandal.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing I wanted to getting back to the
sure.
White Brotherhood, when in the filming of the documentary, we went to California. I was going to follow Harriet through her hypnotherapy school because she right after the 9/11 attacks occurred, and I started to realize that this prediction that I'd gotten from Tommy and that I'd seen a quick vision of, was true. I was freaked out, and I had to contact her. So I just searched and finally found her through Ohio State, which is where she had gone to college. And interestingly, the people in the office, the alumni office, tried to keep us apart. I could never figure that out. That was the really strange thing. It seemed like they were purposely, telling us different things. But somehow we found each other on the internet, and I gave her the Keel book, and it changed her life. I mean, she had all these experiences relating to Mothman, but had no context for them. Strange things have happened to her, like she woke up one night, she was wandering down the road. She didn't know how she got there. She's had some serious intrusions in her life from these forces. And I don't want to give the impression that I think all of these things are government ops. I think if you read Keel's books, it's clear that it's been going on for centuries.
What has been going on for centuries? Yeah.
This paranormal phenomenon. It's in all the ancient lore.
Okay.
The elves, it gets described in different ways, but you clearly have religious miracles and things in history that can't be explained, and I can't. My mind, I can't think of anything right now, but all of his work is about that. And there's so many examples in there that it's pretty clear that and you can't deny that there's something going on. But we followed her to, she changed her life from a woman who had worked in the airline shipping industry, which I had worked in as well. That was one of the things we found out about each other is that we'd both been working as loadmasters at airports. She was working for Evergreen, and I was working for UPS. And she decided to become a healer. And she's got these great abilities to medically intuit people's illnesses just by looking at them. But she needed, and a lot of people came to her for that already, but she needed, some sort of a certificate behind her name. So she decided to go to hypnotherapy school. We went there. We ended up spending most of our time when we weren't in class in San Anselmo. We just were attracted to it for some reason, and we later found out that's where Manson lived when he was right after he got out of prison. And the town recently got flooded this last week.
Providential, perhaps?
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of strange things happened when we were there, and one of the things was they did an initiation into the White Brotherhood for the students. They had a teacher come in from the Eastern Bloc who had worked at Esalen in California, which is where Manson was 2 days before the murders, by the way.
Are you talking about Esalen Institute?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
And so that was a strange connection. The teacher who initiated this Brotherhood initiation was Orman McGill, who's a famous name in hypnosis. He's like the father of hypnosis. Aside from Milton Erickson, you have Orman. And I've often wondered if he was part of the McGill family who got into hot water in Montreal for the McGill University was doing all a large amount of this mind control that was discovered.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
There's been several books written about McGill.
That's interesting.
But he gave this initiation, and he also gave a violet flame meditation that we learned. And then the violet flame thing has come up several times too in this story in other ways.
All right, hold on. The violet flame?
The violet flame. It's a meditation where you visualize a violet flame in your head, and you start to trigger the third eye. Now, the interesting thing about it for me at the time was, right after 9/11, we had gone to Mexico for a holiday, and I took a terrible fall. I was in a hammock. It was up really high, and it broke, and I fell flat on my back on these rocks. And I didn't think I thought I'd broken my back, and I was healed by a shaman who was running the campsite place. We were sort of camping in these little tent-like things. And he turned out to be this shaman who had once been a Contra. And
as in Nicaragua?
Yeah.
Okay.
It actually killed people and was on the wrong side, if you will. Was in a paramilitary band, which I found very unusual. But he was this great healer who people in the village were coming to all the time. And I got better right away, and we did a sweat lodge, and I don't know, I was told by a person from Mexico that they sometimes spike drinks that you have around these sweat lodges, but I saw this violet flame after the sweat lodge.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very strong event. It lasted about an hour. And he had actually predicted that we would see this before, during the sweat lodge. But he didn't tell us exactly what it was going to be. And I went to him later and I said, well, what was it that we were supposed to see? And he said, a burning lotus. And that was what I'd seen. And so that sort of started off this whole project. And then suddenly I find myself deciding to do this documentary.
What is the violet rose emblematic The violet rose I'm thinking. Okay, sorry. The violet fire.
Well, it's like I say, it's a really common Buddhist idea. It's central to it symbolizes awakening, really.
All right. Okay.
The awakening process. And I don't know if you've heard of this, but right now we have a extraordinary thing happening in India. There's a young man who's, I think he's 16, who's people are claiming is the new Buddha. He's not saying he is, but they're saying he is, because you can look at him and you can see that his head is glowing and his forehead is glowing red. So that's an example of what it does. If it's strong enough, you can literally see it from outside the person.
I wonder if they're going to try to portray him as Maitreya. That's interesting. All right. At this juncture also, before we go too far afield, I want to let everybody know you're listening to the Grassy Knoll on AM 1610 WDCX. This is streaming on PacificaRadio.org and RemnantRadio.org. We have with us for a third hour Andrew Colvin. He's made the documentary, The Mothman's Photographer. And Andrew, at this time also, before I go any further, if there's anything else you want to tie into as far as resources for people to be able to obtain, do so at this point.
Oh, that's okay. We've talked about that. So.
In the second hour? Okay. Well, I'm just, sometimes some people don't hear the whole part, so if you want to throw it around again, that's fine. But other than that, we'll move on. You also have put out, this documentary is 5 DVDs long. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, I can talk. Actually, I can say something about the documentary. Yeah, it is 5. It's 30 hours long. It's a reality. It's a Mothman reality series, if you will. And I've just contracted with a lady who's going to transcribe it.
So that will come out in the form of a text.
Yeah. So okay. There's going to be a book, a text book of that transcription, and maybe even this interview that we're doing, and mix it around and take it up and put something out, hopefully this year prior to the Mothman Festival.
Yeah, when is that going to happen? December?
September 17th and 18th.
September? Okay.
In Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
Okay.
There's a new Mothman museum there. John Keel, it's the 50th year anniversary, so John Keel may be showing up for this one.
And harkening back to your DVDs, you figure in those 5 volumes you get about 19 to 20 hours worth of film?
30.
I was close. Okay, 30.
30 hours.
Okay.
A lot of that interviews with people, lightly edited.
So when you say lightly edited, I'm thinking that there's probably quotations around lightly. In other words, you got some decent footage there, not messed with.
Well, I chose the stuff that I thought was the best, and the only thing I would like to do with it at this point, for sure, is to just add a few smoothing out things, a few editing things that will make it just smoother. Because right now they're just basically jump cuts from one thing to the next. All
right, but we have that 5-volume set that's available for $39.99, and that's available on andycolvin.com, and you'll be able to access that. And also going back, you do have a blog that's andycolvin.com/WordPress. Do I remember that correctly?
WordPress, yes.
And then people can chime in there and have a give and take there. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Do you drop in there at all?
Oh yeah. It's my blog.
Yeah, but sometimes the person whose blog it is doesn't always, pop in. But you.
Oh right. Okay.
Yeah, you're an active participant in that. I can take it.
Well, that may happen later, but right now, not a lot of people know about it.
Okay.
So right. I think so it's just me at this point and a few responses.
Okay. Well, people, you've heard it. Go get them. All right. Picking up now with what we've done, and let's do a little recap if we can. Again, just touch base because people pop into these shows, not necessarily hearing the first or second parts. Real quick, well, not real quickly, as much time as you think it would take, what is the Mothman, and where does it happen, and what does it signify for us?
Well, it happens worldwide, and as far as we know, assuming that the Mothman is the Garuda and is the Thunderbird, all of these Birdman-like beings, it's been going on forever, but generally people relate it to the events in West Virginia of 1966 and 7, and all of the strange activity that went around it, the Men in Black, UFOs, animal mutilations, missing persons, bridge collapse, occult activity, etc., etc. And a lot of people disagree on what the Mothman means, or if he exists. My own interpretation is that he is these supernatural beings that so many cultures talk about, and that is he generally appears in ways that will help fight crime. It's kind of it's almost it's kind of funny to say that, but he really is sort of a real life, if you will, crime fighter. Mm-hmm. When I see Superman or Batman, I think of Mothman.
Mm-hmm. You know, and for our Christian listening audience, I mean, you do not get offended. I mean, the fact that there is something going on in the skies astrally that may be induced from our own people or otherwise, you can find plenty of scriptures that'll back that up, and exactly who's behind it or what it is, we really don't know. But the point is that it's not necessarily ascriptural, and certainly it's been documented through time that there's something going on in the skies that we all don't know about, and that doesn't necessarily make it the province of tinfoil hat wearers or any kind of distractors or, you know, Satanists or whatever. But let's face it, something's going on. I mean, I've give you my little testimony as to what I saw, I guess, in that second hour. So, and you had also said that you thought you could not prove it, but you thought that also that the vision of that creature might actually be somewhat, perhaps, handled by, by the government as a mind operation, as a hologram or whatever. You didn't use those words hologram. I'm using them. But, I mean, is that a possibility as well?
Well, it's certainly a possibility, and I think it's clear that the government does have craft that are misidentified as UFOs, and they may even go further than that and actually be abducting people. I just think they do that because it's such a convenient way to do it, because the waters are so muddied by the actual phenomenon itself, mm-hmm. that the government or these corporations or Masonic societies or whoever it is, can get away with it, because either people don't believe it or they think it's just totally supernatural.
Well, as you'll find out in that Van Helsing book I sent you, he's very clear, as much as you want to take his word for it, and he does cite his sources, that Germany had come upon an anti-gravity craft. They didn't really know what to do with it. And of course, I don't think we're all agreed that von Braun, well, we know he came to the United States, but others came to the States as well. And also Charles Wilcox, who wrote the book Transformation of the Republic, lives up in Canada, sent me some footage where the Canadians had an anti-gravity craft. And this goes back to the story about the arrow, their arrow and all this other stuff. They actually had a Mach 3 before we did. And that's a really interesting part of history also. So the point is that this was around. This was around after World War II. And for us to think that, it was necessarily something of the province of some other galaxy isn't necessarily so. And does it really matter? I don't know. But it was out there. So, we are looking at technology. And in fact, Andrew, I got an email that said to me, some woman that's involved, she's a European, and going to certain scientific conferences and seminars, is trying to address this whole bit about biotelemetry with, electronics and such, altering people's behavior without them knowing about it. And her quip was, you know what, if it's happening today, you can bet it was an R&D 50 years ago. And the reason I bring that up is because you see a lot of science fiction writers after World War II writing their works, like Bradbury and Dick especially, Philip K. Dick. And it's like, I don't really think they wrote science fiction. I think that they were privy to what was going on, and it was yet to come about. So it looked like science fiction. It sounded like science fiction. But in fact, it certainly would become science fact in time. Do you want to weigh in on that at all?
I think it's important to remember that both things are going on. I think you have real UFO things going on and fake ones. And
okay,
we may even have a real Mothman and a fake Mothman.
Mm-hmm.
But when you mentioned Philip K. Dick, that is an entry into some things I could go into if you want, or I could go back to the stuff that happened in California during our filming.
Well, let's do that because, like we said, we'll go as long as we'll have to go segment-wise. And if you don't mind, we can pick up these scraps and pieces and loose ends at another time. I would really appreciate that. But let's address the situation that you encountered out in California.
Well, let's see. We were out there. We had the initiations and so forth. We went to a town there, just cruising around, and we found a town named Orinda. Orinda. It's kind of close to Indrid in spelling. Mm-hmm. But we were in Orinda, and I realized, hey, this is the same name that the Indians have for the Thunderbird's energy. The essence of the Thunderbird. And we looked, and there was JFK University sitting there, and across the street was the Masonic Temple. And, of course, everyone who follows JFK lore knows that there's all these Masonic connections to the assassination, which sort of indicate that the Masons had some role. What I didn't know at the time was that JFK is one of the few places in the world where you can get a paranormal degree in the paranormal. And I just recently ran across the name in, I think, Peter Levenda's book of a lady who went there, got that degree, and then was the lady who exposed the October surprise.
The October surprise being
the Reagan Bush. Actually, it was planned by Nixon. Nixon was the go-between between the U.S. and the Iran to keep the hostages in, so that Carter would lose the election. And
they got a better deal cut from them by the new administration, and telling Khomeini that if you hang tight, as soon as the election's over, we'll give you a better deal.
And this same lady is connected to Linda Tripp, who exposed Clinton, or taped Monica Lewinsky, so that whole scandal was behind her.
When you say Tripp exposed Clinton, you got to be really careful about what you say in that deal. Yeah, but she was the one that was behind Lewinsky's.
Oh, okay. Well, that's thought anyway. She was the one who taped Lewinsky.
Right. Okay.
But this lady, Barbara Honegger, also was present in 1953, I think it was, at this invocation of the Nine. And I may have mentioned it briefly, but the Nine is very important, and it's something we should talk about next session. Mm-hmm. But it was an occult ritual involving these JFK conspirators and great inventors, like the guy who invented the helicopter was there, and the guy that invented the implant was there. And it was in Philadelphia, so it's kind of got this Philadelphia connection going on. Mm-hmm. This lady, this group has had major influence. Remote viewing came out of that group. And here they are, dipping into all these key conspiracies, October surprise, Monica Lewinsky, and and this Nine is a UFO. Supposedly these scientists were all tapped into this UFO. And a few years later, 20 years later, in 1974, Philip K. Dick says he's in contact with the same kind of thing, the Valis, this orbiting, machine that's communicating with him. And Robert Anton Wilson said the same. He had the same kind of experiences. I had a lot of things happen that year. That was when I saw the entity at the shrine, and that's when we took this photo that looks like the Garuda. And my niece was seeing, this is an interesting detail, she was seeing glowing letters coming through her room. She talks about this on the documentary. Well, that's the same, I didn't know this, but it's the same thing that Philip K. Dick was describing. And all this was happening in 1974. Connects to this whole occult UFO framework.
I had a listener who has been going back and forth with me about Philip K. Dick's works and his experiences. And I mean, not that necessarily you have to know about this, but I figured, you might be a good one to at least posit the question. We were wondering whether or not, I mean, again, we talk about if it's science fiction and it's being written about, it probably was happening 50 years ago. Do you believe, one, that Dick was privy to what was going on technologically, and two, do you think he might have subjected himself to, perhaps some of this technology that might have made him, kind of whack-a-ding-hoy? Or three, was he necessarily destabilized so that perhaps no one would listen to him? What do you think about that those scenarios?
Yeah, well, I remember reading some things about his being under surveillance by the authorities in California and giving him a hard time. So I tend to think he was being bombarded with waves.
Okay.
And that was probably happening. They were probably targeting certain people. Well, that's one theory. But when I look at my experience, of course, I wasn't a well-known writer, so I think that they could have been getting an artificial thing going, and what I was getting was the real thing, because there was no way, there couldn't have been any way that this was 5 years after Mothman. There was no reason for anybody to be there projecting a hologram for me to see. It just doesn't make sense to me. I don't think that's what happened. So again, I think there's a real and a false thing going on at the same time. Okay. And that's why I get back to the Eighth Tower by John Keel, because that's his idea is of these 8 towers. The first 7 are basically people's egos engaging in nefarious activities for their own gain, for greed and gain, and that's why, and that would represent all of these different covert ops. Well, at the top, the 8th tower, which is beyond all of that. It's a part of us. We're linked to it psychically, but it's neutral. It's not out for gain. It's out to neutralize all of that. And that's very similar to the symbolism of the Garuda, in that it neutralizes the fires of Indra. And that's important to remember that it may have been manifesting to us if this is a vortex of some kind, it's manifesting there for a different reason than it's manifesting to Philip K. Dick. Okay. Philip K. Dick may have just been part of a covert op.
Mm-hmm. But would you agree, as far as you can conjecture, and if that's the case, then say so. I mean, unless you can document it. But I'm asking you for a wild guess, just for the point of conversation. Do you think that Dick was a little tapped into the scientific/technological community? Well,
I assume he was, and I'm not that well versed on Dick. I have a good friend who worked personally with Dr. John Lilly, and I can talk. Well, I don't know that much about Lilly, but this lady became a Buddhist priest, and certainly she seemed to. She talks about all of the cross pollination that was going on. So I mean, I think a lot of things were going around, and I'm sure Dick had access to some of that.
Yeah. And again, this is conjecture, but again, he's somebody else who seems to have died a little too early, whatever that means. I mean, he obviously wasn't so old that he just died at being, 98. And like Orwell and some others, again, it's coincidence, and I'm conjecturing this is one of the times we do it. But sometimes I wonder if his death was a little, premature.
Phil K. Dick?
Yeah. Yeah, and like Orwell.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have proof, but I mean, just like so many other deaths, they all seem, Jim Keith and Hunter S. Thompson. I mean, there's strange, you can often find strange, unexplainable facts there, like, a person who commits suicide and shoots themselves twice.
Yes.
And people are expected to believe these stories. And
you wonder what they touched upon. we're not going to break any new ground right now because we're coming up, obviously, against the end of this interview. And so we'll embark on a new point of view, if you will, and we'll get together on that and where we're going to go from here, because you have so much to say. And it must be staggering also, and I'm putting myself in your place about all, like I said, all these like veins and tributaries that shoot out from this. When you're researching this, and I don't know if you knew you were getting into when you first started it, but Andrew, when you get into it, does it ever seem overwhelming? Or, I mean, and you may be the kind of soul that can say, no, I got a handle on this. It may be overwhelming, but, I got it down. But is it so just unbelievably interconnected?
Most of the time, I just go back to my normal things that I do on a daily basis, and I let go of it. And I've had a lot of Buddhist training, and that's like the number one rule is when a bunch of synchronicities happen, you let it go because it's just part of the awakening process, and you just let it go because that's not the goal. So yeah, there's been times when it, especially during the filming of this documentary, yeah, there were many things, and it would have been easy to get carried away, but luckily I had that background, and I don't mean I'm also a Christian. I was raised a Christian, and I've experienced I had some real serious believable Christian prayer experiences growing up, and even though I was interested in Buddhism then, there wasn't a lot to go on. Couldn't really go to a Buddhist place, so I went to a church instead, and I used the church as a way to develop these things. So, I don't want people who are Christians to think that I don't know what they're about.
Mm-hmm. No, so. I mean, well, half of the listeners are going to be on an evangelical Christian network. And I mean, again, like I told you, I mean, you state your case, and that's okay. I mean, we're not going to argue. Those who hear this, who are, professed Christians, are grounded, and we're not, and that's okay. You make your statements, and they can deal with it, and that's okay. And one last question I'll ask you, and it's a bit of a personal nature, and you can choose not to answer it, but I think you'll understand from whence it comes, and that is, you look at your children, and you realize what's shaking. Is that going to affect any way, shape, or form that you're going to give them a view of the world that they're going to come into? I guess they may be too young right now, but do you have a fear for them for the time that's coming, or are you going to outfit them to realize that the world they get portrayed on the TV is not necessarily what they're going to live in?
Well, it's funny you mention that because I just wrote a passage in my book about that. My grandfather was a bit of a conspiracy theorist, and he certainly didn't talk about it much at all, but he did say a few things here and there about not listening to TV, especially the news. Mm-hmm. And I think it's okay to that it's such a stacked deck way. It's hard to fight the media as a parent. So I mean, I think it's our responsibility to introduce those kinds of filters, if you will, to the kids. So,
well, the thing is, what we try to tell people is that one, if you can't consider how a conspiracy can go, understand this: the world's run by conspiracy. Two, the best thing you can do is, if you're the conspirators, corner money, the global money, and secondly, the informational outlets. And you can do that very easily. And of course, there are a couple of generations into it, and I don't see any problem with that. Now, if you can understand that you're being lied to by the mainstream media, which is doing nothing but giving you a send down from what the conspirators wish, then you understand that we've not really heard too much of the truth. But to outfit your children with that understanding that what they're being told on the surface is not necessarily so, that's a pretty daunting task. You don't want to make your kids some kind of pariahs that nobody wants to play with. But on the other hand, you don't necessarily want them to be brainwashed to become some kind of fodder for whatever, usages or end results that the powers that be may have for them. So I'm assuming, Andrew, that your children are young enough that you don't have to deal with that at this point. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, are you thinking about the fact when the time comes?
Yeah, for sure.
All right, listen, we're going to tie it up right here. And we're going to continue, and like I said, as long as it takes to get this done, is as long as we'll give you. By all means, you have our stage, and I hope that you feel somewhat edified and confirmed by coming out on this, because you have a lot to say. I've sent some emails out. People are saying, well, the Mothman, well, come on. But, you found that to be the tip of the iceberg, have you not?
Oh yeah, it's the story of the, I don't want to say it's the story of the century, but yeah, I'll say it. It's the story of the century.
Yeah.
At least in the conspiracy world it is.
Yeah, but I mean, all right, one last question and we'll let you go. But when you say conspiracy, it doesn't mean it's necessarily false, does it?
Right, yeah, I shouldn't say that. There's, the conspiracy is what the real phenomenon is there to expose the conspiracy, and the conspiracy is trying to hide itself by mimicking the behavior of the phenomenon.
All right, agreed. Now, we don't know where this is going to end, and like I said to you before, I'd be willing as long as you be willing, so please continue with the information, because you've hit on something, I think, that's really important that people are not talking about. And so, Andrew, thank you for having the courage to come out here. And if you don't mind, can we pick this up on the other side and continue it?
Absolutely.
All right, Andrew, listen, thank you very much. We'll be in touch. And this is only round 3 of, who knows, it might be a heavyweight knockout bout. So God bless you. You get better out there in the Northwest with your cold. And we'll be in touch. Is that okay?
Yeah, hopefully it will stop raining. I think it's rained for about 50 days in a row now.
But who's counting?
Yeah. At some point you lose count. Yep.
Okay. God bless you and good night.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Man against God, God against man, man against God, man against nature, man against God, God against man. Very funny religion. Man against God, God against man, man against God, nature against man, man against God, God against man. Very funny religion. Man against God, God against man, man against God. Man against God, nature against God, God against nature. Man against God, God against man, man against God, nature against man, man against nature, nature against man. Very funny religion. Man against God, God against man. Very funny religion. Man against God, God against nature, nature against God, God against nature, nature against man, nature against God. Very funny religion. God against nature, man against God, God against nature, nature against man, man against nature, God against man, man against nature, God against man, man against nature, God against man, God against nature. He who knows this becomes in this creation a creator. think what we're looking for is a way of experiencing the world in which we are living that will open to us the transcendent. Man against God, God against man, man against God, man against nature, man against God, God against man, nature against man. Man against God, God against man, nature against man, man against nature, God against nature, nature against God. I think what we're looking for, I indeed am this creation, for I have poured it forth for myself. Religions are true for their time. If you can find what the truth is and separate it from the temporal inflection, just bring your same old religion into a new set of metaphors.